Hello and a very warm welcome to Sport for Business. We're delighted to be joined today by John Trainor. He's the CEO of Onside, and we together have been looking at a significant piece of research into the way that the Sport for Business community representing the whole sector have been feeling. The first wave of this research took place way back in April and gave us a pointer as to where we were at that point in time. Since then, and between the end of May and dialing into the first couple of days of June, we've been back out there again. The interest from across Sport for Business has been significantly higher again. We had 104 organisations that said their piece and have painted a picture now of where the sector is. So a very warm welcome, John. And what are the main pieces that actually leapt off the page at you when the research was coming back in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's very much an overarching sense of some positivity and some, some optimism starting to come back into the marketplace, which was interesting to see. There was definitely a shift in the types of concerns that people were kind of experiencing and expressing. So, while in the earlier ways, there may have been a more kind of overarching sense of concern and fear. It was what's experiencing through this set of research is kind of more specific, I suppose, realities that both parties, both sponsors and rights holders are starting to experience now in terms of the pure practicalities of, so how does this relationship change as a result of what is happening? So you can see that as a common thread that came through the research, just in terms of the different types of issues and different types of concerns that are here today versus back in April.
Okay, we can take a look now at the concerns as to how they have shifted. Obviously, budget constraints remaining as the number one major concern, but a couple of things to look out for is that, in theory, the sort of, the challenges that face partnerships between sponsors and rights holders, that there's an increase in that. And maybe is there a sense of we're all in this together just becoming a little bit more tense?
Yeah, there's definitely, I suppose pressure to some extent from the top of businesses now for progress to be made around finding some solutions around issues in relation to, what are the arrangements and the agreements and the deals that are in place. And I suppose they're requiring, a lot more diligence and analysis being put into, how do we actually determine what has been the impact in terms of impacts on the value of the relationship, and that's having knock-on consequential effects in terms of, and the research showed in terms of concerns around delays in sponsorship fee payments and reviews of sponsorship contracts, which were the kind of things that came through as things that were, I suppose, growing in concern rather than kind of stepping back in concern. And that manifested itself ultimately in, a big jump, in numbers terms between, 38% of people saying that they were, struggling to maintain relationships with their partners or clients, or finding some tension in that space. Going from 38 to 59 is definitely significant. So I think that's definitely an issue. The concerns that probably may have been more front of mind or more challenging back in April were things like, how do we activate, and can we activate, and should we activate? And similarly, in terms of, from a rights holder's perspective, are we wasting our time going out trying to sell sponsorship today? And I think, maybe some of the good news is that, there's a little bit of easing of that tension now. So you can see again in terms of the sense that engaging in new sponsorship opportunity discussions is improving. So there's 8% more people now kind of going, yeah, maybe it is time to have that conversation. And similarly in terms of, concerns around activating from a sponsor's perspective, they're getting better. So from 55% back down to 47% in terms of people being concerned about that is probably showing where some of the, the more positive progress has been made and the concerns been maybe alleviated a little bit better.
Okay, it has to be said that when we took the first wave of the research back in April, there was still a notional sense that, well, we don't know how long this is going to be. Maybe we will be back in June. Maybe we will be back in July. We've got a much better sense of it now. And perhaps there is some element of phasing. We're used to talking about phase 1, 2, 3, 4. If we look at the numbers, the long-term optimism in terms of a recovery for the sector is increased now in the second wave as opposed to the first wave. Is that something that holds out hope for us in the longer term over the next period of like 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, I think there's the numbers are suggesting some confidence around that there is a recovery in sight, and I guess it's to the point where across the industry now there's just 15% of people who are saying, actually, I'm not so optimistic about what the next 1 to 2 years look like. So essentially the vast majority are saying, actually, yeah, I have varying degrees of optimism that the economy is going to be okay. And obviously that trickles down then into the different parts of the industry. And if we single out the sponsorship sector, for example, there's 5% more people now who are positive or optimistic that the sponsorship industry will be in a better place in the next 1 to 2 years than we would have found back in April. So it's slow growth or it's slow change, but it certainly does feel like as there's a belief that this economy is about to recover. And, if we believe some of the arguments between U's and V's shaped recoveries, but I think as there's more kind of considering the possibilities of V-shaped recoveries and economies feeling like they're ready to recover, there is then within the industry an inherent belief that sponsorship will follow suit.
And the fundamentals of that being that sponsorship does deliver. We were looking at growth in 2020, which we now think will hopefully be just postponed back into 2021. One of the issues, though, that did arise, which will be of concern, is the shift in emphasis from sponsors in particular, from a point of view where, yeah, look, we'll extend out the period of the contract and we'll find a way to make this work. Through now in the second wave, there's more of a sense that, well, maybe we need to renegotiate some of the fees involved in this. Is that going to come as something of a shock to sporting organisations that might already be reeling from the idea of putting on events without the revenue that would come through from gate receipts?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's a different place to where we were in April in terms of what might things look like. But I think it's going to vary for each rights holder, each sports organisation. They're going to have some sponsors and some partners who are hurting more than others in terms of their own businesses. So I think while the overall sense is that probably a quarter of sponsors who are going to the rights holder table will be looking to try and find a renegotiated fee in some shape or form. I think the probability is that for some of those, they're ready to have that agreement in terms of what does the renegotiated fee involve, have its manifestation in a credit note or something further down the line, so it doesn't necessarily imply immediately that it's a cash flow hit on the side of the rights holders. It just means that a lot of sponsors who will go to the table are likely going to need to show in some way reflection that the value has been lost. Okay,
and as you say, at least it is a renegotiation as opposed to looking for an exit on the part of most of the sponsors that are in there.
Yeah, which is good, and that's a striking number that came through the research, which is very encouraging for the industry, is that just 7% of sponsors when we asked, are you thinking of dropping out of any existing sponsorships that you currently have as a result of COVID-19, 7% said yes, we are. 20% said I don't know. It's probably a little bit early to call, but 3/4 of sponsors said no, we're not thinking about cutting or dropping out of our sponsorships as a result of it. So that's a measure now, that's a level of the zone of potential impact that might happen in terms of sponsors looking to exit as a result of what has happened. And I think that would probably please the minds of some rights holders who, when we asked rights holders, do you anticipate your sponsors or partners actually looking to step out? 23% of them said, yeah, I think there's going to be some of our partners who are going to look to exit. So I think both parties in different ways are actually aligned to the possible reality of the amount of businesses and brands who will actually be exiting sponsorships in some shape or form.
Okay, and some of the commentary that's come through on it as well, which part of the full report does reflect that too. There's a strong sense of the need for collaboration and the need for talking to each other in order to actually iron out these things. Yeah. One of the main issues over the last couple of weeks, which was right front and centre when we were taking the survey, and still again today, is the concept of playing sport behind closed doors, certainly at the elite level anyway. And there is a strong sense, the figures that we're looking at there now, is that yes, this should happen. We should be seeing these big events. We should be getting them on and getting them out there in 2020. Significant that there's about a third that actually genuinely believe that we should be doing it with reduced capacity. Now, we didn't specify what that reduced capacity was going to be, but were you surprised by how high that was, given the fact of public health concerns, or is it shifting towards that quite quickly already?
And I think it nicely aligns with the consumer, the general public's point of view. So I think, again, we did some research probably a few weeks back, and obviously everything changes by the week now, but there was a similar sense that there was a significant proportion of population, close to 4 in 10, in some shape or form, were up for the idea of the games coming back behind closed doors and some level of audience engagement. So I think definitely sponsors and rights holders will have, taken soundings from how the public are feeling and kind of taken that into their judgment. But I think what's great is that there's, great alignment between the different stakeholders within the industry. So it's the same level of sponsors, and it's the same levels of rights holders. It's the same levels of agencies and broadcasters who are feeling this way. So it's not as if one is pushing one way and the other is going the other way. They're very much in alignment in terms of the sense that this is the right thing to do, which is great.
Okay, and we're looking at now at some of the actual events themselves and people's confidence in the ability of those events to actually take place and carry on. The SSE Electricity League, first and foremost, up there. We've got 4 teams back in training already now, but all of the big rugby tournaments as well. People are genuinely confident across our sector that they will take place. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think across the board, it was between 40, 4 in 10 and 3 in 4 across the different properties that were tested, that people believe these sports are ready to get back into play. So as you say, soccer kind of felt like a natural territory, and it was interesting in looking at some of the qualitative responses as much as the quantitative numbers that we received, that it was exciting to see some of the innovation that ultimately this industry is starting to push through in some of the suggestions that were fed back. So one of the respondents, spoke about the potential for, League of Ireland teams to start to try and create tournaments with other teams in other locations, other territories, and that may be ready to kind of pair up. So again, as much as soccer is seen to be potentially a good property to get back into play, for us, there was as much encouragement in the fact that the industry are starting to think about, imagine the possibilities of what could happen with something like League of Ireland, and maybe starting to use this world to actually start to see our teams playing teams in other countries that are coming back quicker than others.
So a lot of that thinking that would be in the innovation space, that we've actually had time to consider some of those elements. One of the other real positives on it, we asked the question of women's sport, which was developing a real sense of momentum coming into this pandemic, and the question as to whether that was going to be maintained or whether it was going to come out. And looking at the figures that we can see on screen now there at the moment, that's a very significant figure of 53% who would strongly agree that their organisation was willing, ready and looking to invest in women's sport.
Yeah, I'm glad we asked the question, because there have been quite a bit of talk over the last few weeks about, what is going to happen to women's sport as a result of this. And surely, there's going to be threats and pressure in terms of, I suppose, ultimately sponsors seeing it as a platform or an opportunity to invest in. And a lot of that was unsubstantiated and it wasn't pretty clear, whereas we've got a very strong voice from the industry and from your members now, which is that women's sport probably looks like a stronger opportunity now than it may have done pre-COVID. And that stacks up and makes sense. There's no doubt that part of the reality of what's going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years is that some sponsors will potentially look to resize their sponsorship activities and their sponsorship investments. And some of them may choose to shift from a marquee sponsorship type of a model to something that might give them a different platform to go onto, where the asset fee may not be as high and they can maybe invest significantly in an activation strategy. So I think women's sport, positions itself perfectly to be able to appeal to a strategy like that a brand may or may not choose to go. But to get half the industry saying that we think their organisation is going to be more interested in supporting women's sport the aftermath of COVID-19 is really, really encouraging for the industry.
It is indeed, and probably it's at a lower cost base as well. So maybe new organisations that might be looking at getting involved in sponsorship, that have already begun to dip their toe in the water, that might have become part of the sport for business community before really expressing themselves in the market. Maybe they're some of those that are actually going to be looking at getting involved in there. It's been a long 3 months, yes, which seems strangely to have gone by in the blink of an eye. But we did ask as well about some of the campaigns and some of the work that organisations from a sporting perspective and from a sponsor's perspective have been doing. And we can see some of those up there now. The GAA Club Together initiative that they did with Super Value and Centra featuring prominently there, as well as Croke Park, and also the FAI Home Skills initiative. What was the sense and the feeling coming through from the numbers and indeed from the qualitative research about how sport had behaved and how sponsors had performed over the course of these 3 months?
Yeah, I mean, there was our very clear voice from the industry that, what has come from the GAA, be that the association and its partners like Musgraves Group, but also the actual association itself, and in terms of how it made Croke Park available and what it has done in Croke Park was very clearly, we look at lots of research and sometimes you're scrambling to find the clear standout. That was absolutely the clear standout, and it came out very strong. Interestingly, 75% of the sponsorship activity that was recognised or called out by the industry practitioners was local activity, local brands doing local pieces, as opposed to 25% that was international brands like Nike and things being done by FC Barcelona and international organizations. Some of that was singled out as being good activity, but again, coming back to what were the large volume of mentions were sponsors in Ireland like Bank of Ireland or Boots or Aviva or AIG, all coming across really, really positively. And in terms of Irish rights holders, the likes of the LGFA and Horse Racing Ireland and Swim Ireland, it was definitely a sense that what was being seen to be done well at the moment was local. To some extent was grassroots in nature, as opposed to some of the maybe bigger global type brands doing bigger global activity that just didn't seem to pop or bounce as significantly strongly.
Okay, well, I guess we stayed in our minds even within our 2K and our 5K and now our 20K limit. So that's good to see, but well done to those sporting organisations who did feature. It's nice to be recognised for what you've done, and they've done a very good job on it. We're going to come back to this again. We're going to do a third wave. We can't pin the dates in it at the moment because this is such a rapidly shifting landscape that we're operating in within the sport and the sponsorship scenarios. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, John. Absolute pleasure to do the research with you and to get this real sense as to where the sector is. If you want to be a part of Wave 3, the details on how to do that will be coming up on screen now when we finished, as well as the details on how to get in touch with John and the team at Onside, who will be able to go into this in greater detail and greater depth. And some of the numbers really do merit a very strong, considered look at. It's been a pleasure to talk with you today, pleasure to work with you over these last couple of phases, and looking forward to phase 3 already. Thank you very much, John Trainor.
Thank you, Rob.